Okay. The Lord is good. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna to the Son of David. There's only one God. He's the only true God. And one mediator, which is Jesus. And he's the permanent mediator. And he's the one who gives us the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And life more abundantly. That's what he said. So we want to go for that. We want to try and get those keys to the kingdom of heaven and the life more abundant. And it's possible. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst. That's what Jesus said. So if he was in the midst, then miracles should be breaking out all over the room. Or just be breaking out among the 2 or 3. Jesus is there, right? I mean, if he's there, there's going to be miracles. But there's a problem with people. They're not mentally right. And not mentally right. They don't understand. They can go to church, but they don't get it. But I do know. And the great possibility of blessing, tremendous amount of possibility, tremendous amount of power can be manifest. It's possible that it can be manifest if you have people in the right state of mind that are seeking God, And they don't say, oh, I already have God. No, you do not. You do not. There's always much more to God. There's always something that you don't have of God. There's always the need to seek God. So, here we are in a new message. It's all the commandments of Jesus. I'm going to really try to plumb the depths of all the statements of Jesus. I've always wanted to do this. It's really the bottom line, and it's so important because he made all these statements about his commandments. And he didn't always say, this is a commandment, and now I'm going to command you. And then he went and told you. No, he just said, do this or do that. So that's what I'm going to try to totally gather all the statements he made about what to do. Do this and do that. And it's very difficult. It's the complete opposite of Paul. Many of the things he said to do were very, very difficult and almost impossible. And natural. And without supernatural help, it's not going to happen. A lot of these things, and he was very demanding many times. Many of the things that he said are very, very demanding and very works-oriented is what I'm getting at. Paul was the complete opposite. He said, oh, don't worry. It doesn't matter what you do. Just believe. But Jesus was the opposite. But men liked the doctrine of Paul better. But Jesus was very, very works-oriented. Many of the statements. I mean, there's a few things where he says, just believe, you believe. Yeah, right. But then there's a whole bunch of statements that he's saying you've got to do this and you've got to do that, you've got to do the other, or else you're going to hell. There's one in particular. There's one section in Matthew. I believe it's chapter 24. But I haven't even put that on here yet. And I'm going to keep searching for other cases where he just said, do this, do that. So I wanted to start out in John, where he says in John 14, 15 and 16, he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And I will pray the Father, and he shall give you another comforter, that he may stay with you forever. So it's a very commandment-oriented statement. So we need to find out what those commandments are, for sure. Like I said, he didn't always say that it was a commandment to do things. He just said do them. This is what you should do, which I would consider that a commandment. I would consider everything that he said to do a commandment. Okay, starting with Matthew 19, 16 through 21. I've been over this a lot. And one came and said to him, Good master, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life? And he said to him, Why do you call me good? There is none good but one, that is God. But if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. Now, he didn't say keep my commandments. He said the commandments. So then the guy said to him, which? Jesus said, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, lying, that's lying. Honor your father and mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And the young man said to him, I have kept all these things from my youth up. What do I lack yet? I mean, isn't there anything else I need to do? There sure is. Jesus said to him, if you want to be perfect, go and sell what you have and give to the poor, and you shall have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. Well, that's very, very far out difficult, extreme difficulty here. Impossible, basically. Plus, it's not really a commandment to everybody, because he was saying, follow me personally. But why he made it so difficult for the guy, I don't know. I mean, I don't agree with this at all. I mean, and I believe the next verse says he went away flabbergasted because he had a lot of money, or, he had a lot of goods or whatever, a lot of possessions. But it does make sense because he was very radical, Jesus, a lot of the things he said, very radical. Because if he had a lot of money, then he could have given it to build churches. He could have given it, he could have kept making money with it, and then he could have helped people over the long term. But to go and sell everything and then just give it away is stupid. That's just stupid. And he wasn't even going to be around to follow. Because I believe this is a literal following of him when he was alive on the earth walking around. And then he was going to leave. And then what? Then the guy was going to be destitute. Then he was going to be in the poorhouse. So we really can't believe this is a commandment to everybody. In order to believe in Jesus, in other words, to be right with Jesus, you have to sell everything you own and then what? Then just believe as you sit out in the woods in a cardboard box, right? No, that is not going to happen. So I wrote down here, only 5 of the 10 commandments are mentioned by Jesus. So, if we start comparing it to the 10 commandments, right? Only 5 of them, half of them, are mentioned. And then I wrote, love your neighbor is a commandment, but not in the 10. And then I said, he also did not mention the first commandment, or to love God. He didn't mention that. No, he did not mention to love God. Just in this passage, which is repeated in the 3 Gospels, Matt, Mark, and Luke, there's a little bit of a variation on it. And I've said before, if you haven't heard, that many, I don't know if it's most or many, I think it would be most, of the modern versions corrupt this verse, and they totally change it. But it's only in Matthew. They don't corrupt it, which is crazy. They don't corrupt it in Mark or Luke. So then why do they corrupt it in Matthew? That just shows you the people are bird brains. So I thought about it, and it came to me that in John 10, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. Twice, as you can see, it is said in the Textus Receptus, in the King James and all the other Bibles that use that Greek text. He says, I am the good shepherd. The 11th verse says, the good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Right. So I think we can consider him as good. And then the 14th verse says, and know my sheep, and I am known of my sheep. I adjust these verses because the language is terrible. If it's not one bad thing that they do when they formulate these sentences, it's another. But I make them so perfect to understand. So that'd be like saying, when the guy came to Jesus and said, good master, and Jesus said, why do you call me good? If the guy had heard him preach this message that he preached in John, which, by the way, was near the Mount of Olives. I want to find out where he said all these words in chapter 8, 9, and 10. And it appears it was in the Mount of Olives, which I found out was in East Jerusalem. So that's where he was, supposedly, when he delivered all these words, because there's so much more to this. The whole chapter of 10 is very interesting, to say the least. And so, if he had heard him preach this, the guy that came up to him and said, good master, right? And he says, well, why are you calling me good? And he would have said, well, because I just heard you say that you were the good shepherd back at the synagogue. That's why. What do you call me good for? Well, you just called yourself good back at the synagogue or back wherever. At the outdoor meeting we had. He said you were the good shepherd. That's why, Jesus. That's why I call you a good master. So, in this, we see clearly the contrast between John, Gospel of John, and Matt, Mark, and Luke. It's like a different Jesus. And there's no doubt. There's no doubt it's a different Jesus in John compared to Matt, Mark, and Luke. In some ways, in many ways. But you could reason it out, and you could justify the statements, both of them. Ultimately, God is higher than all. But he was still saying God was greater and that he wasn't God. And that he was the good shepherd. He was still a shepherd. But I guess you could say that ultimately God is really good compared to him. And there was in other words, there's no comparison. So you can harmonize the two of them, but you have to realize that Jesus is a good shepherd, but it doesn't mean that he's as good as God. So then I thought of Psalm 23:1. David said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." So here we have David calling God, not Jesus. He didn't know anything about Jesus. He didn't know anything about a son of God, a mediated son who was going to die on a cross. Although he does have that psalm, but it's unclear if he really understood it. He certainly wasn't talking about Jesus. He was talking about the mystery of God. He was talking about the Lord God, the Almighty God, the God he knew, who was a mystery, of course. And he was saying that he was his shepherd. So the Father here, you could say, is being called the shepherd. So because where does that fit in? If Jesus is the shepherd, where does the Father fit in? So is Jesus the lower shepherd and the Father the upper shepherd? He's the king shepherd and Jesus is the underling. He's the hired shepherd. Because he even talks about that in that chapter 10. How and I don't even know why. And I say, well, what's the point? Because he's saying something about a hired. He's not a hired person. And so, we could go over that sometime, and I'm not going to go over it right now. But it did bring the thought to me that, in a sense, Jesus was hired by God to be a shepherd. But yet, God is the supreme shepherd. So he's really like a sub-shepherd. He's really like a hired. But he said he wasn't hired. There's language in that chapter. King James uses the word hireling, but that means a hired person. He says, the true shepherd is not a hired person. Well, no, if the Almighty God is the true shepherd, the ultimate, the high shepherd, then any shepherd under him would be a hired shepherd. That's right. Because they always capitalize Lord in the Old Testament. Which they don't do at all in the New Testament. So then, move back to Mark 12, 28 through 31. And coming up, one of the scribes heard them reasoning. Knowing that he had answered them well, he asked Jesus, "What is the first commandment of all?" And Jesus answered him, "The first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. So he was talking about somebody else. He wasn't talking about himself. So he agreed. Once again, he affirms here that God is only one Lord. He's not three persons. I just read a list of beliefs in an Assembly of God church, and a church that I went to many years ago, and they quote the same, they parrot the same line that just about every church uses these days, is God exists as three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. But that is not in the Bible. That's amazing. It's not there. There's no such thing as that. But yet, that's the way it is. Because here Jesus is saying that God is one Lord. He's not three lords. That's what Jesus believed. And then he does say to love God here. He says, you'll love the Lord your God with all your heart. And he goes on. Mind, soul, strength. This is the first commandment. So that's the first commandment. Yet he didn't mention that to the guy we just read. That section we just read. He didn't mention that. So that's an imperfection. That's a flaw. And how and why, we don't know. So Jesus was flawed. There's no doubt. But yet God considered him righteous enough to be a worthy sacrifice. There's no doubt. He wasn't some kind of an angel that was flawless and everything he said was 150% true. No, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. It had to do with he was the son of Mary. He was the son of Mary, and he was also son of God somehow. Genetically. That's the key word, genetically. And we don't really know any more than that. And then it's amazing because then he says the second is like it. But there's no doctrine like this in the Old Testament. There's no doctrine that says this. I mean, these commandments are in there, but he's making one commandment, then he's making the second commandment. Well, that's not what the Ten Commandments say. The Ten Commandments don't even have these words. They just say, have no other gods. It says, have no other gods before me. That is the first commandment. And it goes on and on and on, but it never says, in the Ten Commandments, it never says love your neighbor as yourself. Never says it. So this is a variation. This is different. This is a different doctrine. Then we go to Luke 6:27 through 31. And here we go again, because I can't resist but go over this again. I've been going over this. Let's see what I can find in this. This is the Luke version. But I say to you, which hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you. Now that's very difficult to do. See, this is a commandment. This is a commandment. And it's very difficult. Most people cannot do this. It depends on the situation. It depends on how much of an enemy the person is. I mean, if they're literally trying to take you out, then you certainly are not going to love them. You've got to defend yourself and so forth. So it really just depends on what kind of an enemy we're talking about. Bless them that curse you. Pray for them which despitefully use you. Well, you could do that. You could do that if you wanted to. And to him that hits you, I updated that, him that hits you on one cheek, offer also the other. Oh, sure. Who's going to do that? Nobody at any time. No one. Nobody. There's no such thing. That is not normal. That is not natural. That is not even possible, really. To have somebody smash you in the face and then you just say, wow, it hurts like hell. You just broke my jaw. I think, why don't you hit me on this side again? See if you can crack that side. It's the most ridiculous thing. And this is considered, this is a commandment. These are commandments of Jesus. Really. Now, he didn't say, this is my commandment to you, but he's telling you, he's saying, but I say to you. I update a lot of these things, but I say to you, right? Now, when he says that, it's a commandment. I don't think it's a suggestion. I don't think he said, here's an idea you might want to play with. No, it's a commandment. He's telling you to do it. He says, so to him that hits you on one cheek, offer also the other, and him that takes away your cloak or your clothes, forbid not them to steal your coat also. See, I updated that. That's why I'm reading it slowly, because I changed it. I changed the word take, and I put the word steal in there because that's what somebody would be doing. If they took away your clothes, they'd be stealing your clothes. It doesn't say that in any version, but that's what it means. Well, I just changed that so that it read better. And him that takes away your cloak, forbid them not to steal your coat also. In other words, go right ahead. Steal my coat also. Here's my cloak. So if somebody steals your cloak, so you wake up in the middle of the night and there's some guy in your closet gathering all your clothes or stealing whatever out of your house, because this is just an example. Don't say, don't do that. Say, no, by all means, take everything I've got. I've got all these things over here. You can have them also, because obviously you're in great need, and I'm putting you first over my own welfare. Even though you're a career criminal, and a drug addict, I'm going to give you everything I have. No, I think not. So once again, that is impossible. That is burdensome to even consider. That is ridiculous. It is implausible. It is unreasonable. Oh, yes. It is totally unreasonable to think that if you've worked for all these things that you have, your clothes and everything, you've worked, a job 8 to 5 for years and years, and then somebody comes in and thinks they can just come in and take your clothes from you. This is just an example. I mean, take everything from you, potentially. And you just say, no, I'm really easy. You can have everything here if you really want it. You're in need. So just, in other words, don't forbid them not. Don't say don't do it. That's so off the charts, ridiculous. So crazy, really. So crazy. It goes on in verse 30. Give to every man that asks of you. no matter what? That's not reasonable. And of him that takes away your goods, don't ask for them back again. So, if the thief comes in and you give him everything, don't ask him to give them back to you. Don't dare. Don't be so unreasonable to do that. Really, it really, this is most unreasonable. This is most ridiculous. Commandments, I guess you could say. Instructions is a word I also come up with. The instructions of Jesus, the list of things that Jesus says you need to do, that he wanted you to do, right? Well, this is not dealing with reality. No, sir, and no, ma'am. And we have 31, and as you would that men should do to you, do also to them likewise. Well, it's like saying if you want men to give you a lot of things, and give them everything you have, and then they'll give it back to you. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense. And it goes on, the same chapter, in the same vein. This whole chapter is like this, apparently. But love your enemies and do good and lend, hoping for nothing again. So he's saying the same thing again, just in a different way. And your reward shall be great, and you shall be the children of the highest. I've been over this. For he is kind to the unthankful and to the evil. And I went over this in that last series I did on Men Have Seen God. And it's totally untrue if you believe that the God of the Old Testament is the God that he's talking about. To say that the God of the Old Testament was kind to the unthankful and to the evil, he was the most brutal guy. He was totally brutal. He was merciless, 100% merciless. And I went over all that. And you could go on. There's other cases too. Where at times where he decided to go after evil. Well, there's a lot of that around. Unthankful, but just evil. And he had no mercy whatsoever. Nothing. So to say that he is kind is a different God. That'd be a different God than the God of Isaiah or the God of David. I say the God of Isaiah, but then I say, Isaiah was kind of a different prophet, and he had the prophecies of Jesus, but then David had a prophecy of Jesus too. But then it was a whole different story. Things changed when David came on the scene. Because Saul was different. The way everything happened with Saul, there was never a commandment to David to go kill everything that breathed. Yet Saul was burdened with that. And I say, that doesn't make sense. So you almost think there's a different God operating. The God that commanded Saul to go kill everything that breathed is not the same God as David was dealing with. Well, that's what it seems like. But then the God of David seemed unreasonable at times. So this is according to what's written, Because there's one time he wanted them to take a census. Or David wanted them to take a census. And then God got angry or something and started killing thousands of people. It doesn't make any sense. Now, Makes no sense whatsoever. And they didn't even do anything. And he killed them all because David wanted to take a census. All he wanted to do is know how many soldiers he had. That's all he wanted to know. Why is that a crime? And then so God said, well, I'll give you 3 choices. And that was weird. And then eventually he chose one of the judgments. And then God proceeded to just destroy thousands of people. Many thousands. That doesn't make any sense. They weren't even supposedly evil or even unthankful necessarily. There was no reason given of them being unthankful or evil. Except it really was supposedly the mistake of David. So supposedly, this is supposed, he killed all these people because David made a mistake, which made no sense anyway. That he wanted to take a census of how many people were in his army. That's just doesn't make any sense. It's totally nonsensical, irrational. So 36, verse 36, be merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Well, like I say, the God of the Old Testament was not merciful. Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Well, you have to judge. I mean, to command people to be merciful is one thing. It's fine, good. I'll try and do that. But then to say that God, the God of the Old Testament was merciful, that's not true. That's not true. Judge not, so you won't be judged. So you can't make any judgments about anything? You make any judgments, and then if you judge wrong, then you're going to be judged or something. No. There is the case of somebody who's always judging everybody and he's never looking in the mirror. That's how I interpret these verses. There's always people who are always pointing their finger at everybody else, right? They never point the finger back at themselves and look at themselves. And Jesus talked about that when he said, first get the log out of your eye before you try to help somebody. Get the problem out of your own life before you think you're going to help somebody else. If you can't even help yourself, right? If you can't even help yourself, how are you going to help somebody else? And that's basically what he was saying. He said, condemn not. What about people that are evil, pure evil? They got to be condemned. And you shall not be condemned. All right, so you just and some Christians take this literally and they don't want to punish any murderers or anything. What's up? A murderer will murder somebody in their family and they'll say, oh, I forgive them. Oh, is that right? That's not right. So condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven. And it says, give, and it shall be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall men give to you. For with the same measure that you give, it shall be given to you again. I modernized that, really needed it. And so this makes no sense because, again, he's claiming that if you give all your goods away, then somehow everybody's going to come running to you with like an abundance of goods. No. That is not going to happen. If I sell everything that I have and give away all my money, nobody is going to give me anything. Not much. No. The government may give me something. I mean, you might be able to have somebody give you something. Otherwise, Nobody is going to replace all the things that you gave away. But here it's claiming that running over, so somehow they're going to give you an abundance, as if you can. It's like that's what all the preachers try to say. Is they try to say that you can't outgive God and all this business, and that if you give to God, then He gives you back. He's like a bank. He gives you interest on your money, and if you give Him all the money, then He's going to give you all the money back with interest. No, I don't see that. I don't see that happening. No. And if you give with the same measure that you give, so if you give everything away, you get everything back. No. How? How is that going to happen? If you don't have anything after giving it all away, how are you going to get it back? Get it all back? You're not. One woman who had cancer, she was a follower of Kenneth Copeland, and she had given him all her money, and she still died of cancer. And apparently on her deathbed, she was lamenting that she hadn't given him enough. The billionaire, Kenneth Copeland, who brags about how he's made $1 billion through the years. I don't know how much money he really has, but that is what happens with people. They somehow end up thinking that they're going to be saved by giving away everything. But then she wasn't saved. She died. She died of cancer. Cancer? That should be the last thing that happens to a person who believes in Jesus. I mean, Jesus was a healer. He wasn't a person who gives you cancer. What's up with that? No, I still believe in the power, the healing Jesus. But don't think you're going to buy the healing. No, that's not right. That's not true. So we have Luke 6:46. Why call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? So I just took this one verse because it just shows you that He wanted you to do things. To the point where, and it gets even more intense. That chapter in Matthew 24 that says if you don't love and feed and clothe the Christians, then you're going to hell. You're going to go to hell, that's all. Which is a burden and a half. He says, my burden is light. All right, I'll go with that. But here he's saying that, you've got to do the things that I say. You can't even call me Lord. That's tough. That is difficult. And that's a complete opposite of Paul, where he says you're not justified by works. Jesus was the complete opposite. He said you're justified by works big time. You really need supernatural help. You need some help. The bottom line is that people need help on every level and in everything they do. So that's why we have to seek God. We're seeking His help. We're seeking His power.